When you think of classic adventure novels, you probably think of The Hobbit, or The Count of Monte Cristo, Lord of the Rings, maybe even Tarzan. And these are all amazing adventure stories that deserve every bit of the reputation that they have earned over the years. But if you're looking for your next great quest, for a new adventure, if you're always looking for more riveting tales, here are 10 brilliant adventure novels that I think deserve a place on your reading shelf. So, firstly, is a book that got me into reading adventure in the first place when I was a kid. So, imagine finding an old manuscript that points towards an expedition that everyone else believes is completely impossible, but there's a few mad scientist types that are not so sure. That's the premise for one of the greatest adventure stories, Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne, the master of adventure fiction. Now, it is a little bit challenging when we're speaking about Jules Verne because picking one book is very difficult. But I would contend that reading Verne in general is essential if you want to get into adventure. He is really one of the all-time greats. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Around the World in 80 Days is a classic of adventure fiction, The Mysterious Island, and so on and so forth. There are many others, but I personally adore Journey to the Center of the Earth. This was the first Verne novel that I ever read, and I think that's part of the reason why it still feels so special to me, even after all these years. His books really have this incredible optimism of exploration, and I love all the different runes and the questioning. They make you feel like every mountain, volcano, and cave might hide something extraordinary, a new adventure. And they also, I think, make you a little bit proud to be human and to possess this human hunger for adventure and exploration and discovery. So, Journey to the Center of the Earth. Now, as great as Verne is as an adventure storyteller, he wasn't the first, and he won't be the last either, or he wasn't the last. But going back hundreds of years before Verne, we find another novel that arguably started it all. And this is Don Quixote by Cervantes, or Don Quixote de la Mancha. Now, this is obviously not the whole book. I have a tiny one here. It's quite long, the actual book. I have it on Kindle, but this is a tiny Spanish children's language version that I was given by a family friend. So, I really like it. I think it's pretty cool to have these little tiny books as well. But Don Quixote, essentially, this was written right after the Middle Ages, after all these knight stories with the damsels and the knights in shining armor. And the book is about a character, Don Quixote, who reads too much of these kind of fiction. And he thinks he's living in a fictional world to a hilarious effect. It's funny, but it's also philosophically and it's just endlessly innovative. Cervantes really manages to make wandering through Spanish countryside in search of dragons and maidens that aren't there feel like one beautiful, grand, fun adventure. And I think it's pretty relatable to us in this age of metafiction, fiction about other fictional stories. It's also one of the funniest novels out there, but it's deeply moving because beneath the comedy, beneath the surface, it's really about a character who simply refuses to let the world become ordinary and is experiencing the wonder of the world, to dream the impossible dream. There's a great musical called Man of La Mancha. Obviously, it changes the story a bit and the theme, and it paints out our hero a little more tragio-comically, shall we say. But it's also a lot of fun. I highly recommend Don Quixote. Now, if you want a true classic of the genre, I would start with Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. One of the amazing things about adventure stories is that they seem to share a lot of the same or similar ingredients. So you have to have a journey into the unknown, a world that feels really kind of odd, but super vivid as well, more vivid than our own. Usually there's strange companions that are brought together by fate, chance, whatever, and all these familiar tropes are part of adventure novels. But besides Treasure Island, I struggle to think of another novel that has had a bigger influence on what we picture when someone says adventure. What are the tropes of an adventure novel? The treasure maps with an X on it, parrots and peg leg, mutiny, pirates, buried gold, all this stuff. Stevenson didn't invent any of these things, but he certainly popularized and defined the way that we see them today. Film series like Pirates of the Caribbean, or the Pirates of the Caribbean, I should say, and the popular anime One Piece draw super heavily from Treasure Island. You can see the explicit influences. Honestly, most swashbuckling tales basically draw from Treasure Island. I particularly see a lot of influence between the charismatic Long John Silver in Treasure Island and Captain Jack Sparrow. That kind of character type is super resonant in Treasure Island, super resonant in adventure stories more generally. Now, I won't go too much into the plot except to say that it moves wonderfully. The story opens with a mysterious old sailor arriving at a seaside inn with a kind of an old treasure chest or an old sea chest. He's looking over his shoulder, and then it starts to unfurl from there. And there's talk of hidden treasure and coded maps and mysterious pirates on the trail. Now, I'm probably quite a little bit biased at the very least because I'm half Scottish and I have a huge affinity for great Scottish literature. And it really is a tradition unto itself, super influential, super important. But Robert Louis Stevenson just mastered adventure. He is one of the greatest. Hard to beat him. If you enjoy Treasure Island, you could also continue with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or with Kidnapped, another great one, another fantastic novel that deserves far more readers and attention than it gets. Another great adventure tale by Robert Louis Stevenson. Now, there's also a ton of great children's stories, great children's literature that has a wonderful sense of adventure, but two in particular come to mind to me. The first one is The Chronicles of Narnia. C.S. Lewis is great, and I so appreciate his sense of wonder, something I've been thinking a lot about the last few days. There are 7 books in the series, in the Narnia series, and each of these has its own adventure. But my top choice, if I had to choose one book from within the series, we could just choose the whole series itself. But I'd go with the 5th book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This is really, it's a gorgeous tale. Books like The Silver Chair, which is the 6th one, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is, I guess, the 2nd one or the first one that was written, they have more, let's say, suspense and danger, perhaps. But there's more wonder in this book. They're great characters. It's a great entry point as well through a painting. In other ones, it's through a wardrobe and whatnot. You're familiar with the tropes. And there's something just about wonder, right? The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is about exploring the world that some of these earlier books in the series introduced to us. It's about island hopping island after island. There's different mystery, and there's a different temptation, and there's a different danger, and there's a different problem on each of these different islands. And Lewis's conversational tone is just great, but it works so well in this book, I think. He brilliantly captures that childlike belief that there might still be something, another world just beyond the one we know, just beyond the next horizon. That theme that kind of permeates all of the Narnia books is just beautifully captured. And yeah, the new horizon effect, we might call it, the potential to reveal something extraordinary. Wonderful, wonderful. I guess like I said, I'm hung up on the notion of wonder in literature this week, but this really is a fun adventure story. Superficially, it's really a simple voyage across the sea, but when you dig down, it's a journey of courage and friendship and personal growth, ultimately, maybe spiritual growth as well. And if you've ever thought that children's stories can't be some of the greatest adventure stories ever written, I would start with this one. Read Voyage of the Dawn Treader. You could read it without having read the other Narnia books. It's a really good one. Second, we have Peter and Wendy, or Peter Pan, another great Scottish book and technically play. J.M. Barrie wrote both a play and a book on Peter Pan. I think the play is called Peter Pan and the book's Peter and Wendy. Or he might have called them both Peter Pan in different varieties. Now, you know the story, right? I've spoken about this one before, so I'll be brief in reiterating it, but it's really one of the great adventure stories, influenced also explicitly by Treasure Island. The character of Captain Hook, as an example, was written not too long after that. And the philosophical question that is the core of this is, what if there was a boy who never grew up? What would it be like if we never grow up? The what ifs of this world are just so amazing. And there's a reason we still use the term Neverland to refer to a place that we escape to and that we live in this kind of immature imagination land without growing up. Still the promise that perhaps somewhere beyond the stars, there really is a place where there's pirates and mermaids and children can fly. It sounds pretty amazing, like a pretty great adventure to me. Peter Pan, Peter and Wendy is a funny, magical, exciting, and really beautiful adventure story that begins with imagination. So children's literature understands this, I think, better than probably any other genre, really. I think people often dismiss it because they've seen the Disney film, but the novel has a surprising amount of melancholy and depth beneath the surface. So reader beware, it's not the Disney version, but children's literature is deep and capable of changing you at any stage of life. And this is one of my core beliefs in this world. And speaking of great books and great children's literature in particular, one of my favorite parts of this channel, of running this channel in general, has become reading books alongside some of you. It's really been a huge blessing. So if you'd like to join us, I'd love to invite you to join the Reading Room, our book club over on Substack. It's a lot of fun. Every month we read great books together. One book will be a children's work, and then we'll also read one classic novel simultaneously. We'll have live discussions. What I learned from you guys in those conversations is really amazing, and I'm hoping to grow this and see more people and more voices and more conversations in the future. We take time talking about literature and books and life with a wonderful community of readers and book lovers. So if that sounds like something that you'd enjoy, I would love to have you join us in the reading room. I'll leave the link below. This is also the best way to support the channel. Now, let's get back into it with our top 5 adventure books on this list here. Now, speaking of books that influenced the genre, one could argue that this book is really the one that kind of started it all. We talked about Don Quixote earlier, and that one is the first novel, perhaps. So that one started it in some ways. But most adventure stories, they really begin with this idea of the characters coming together, the ensemble cast being built. This is the first real adventure novel, and it subverts the expectations before I think expectations had even been established by taking all the characters away until we have only one character remaining. And the premise is this. Imagine you're shipwrecked on an island, you're completely alone, no town, no friends, no rescue, and it's just you and the island. And whatever you've managed to drag ashore, it's exactly what you get in Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Now, Robinson Crusoe is an amazing book, one of my personal favorites. I read this for the first time as a kid, and I remember having to look up a bunch of words. I think I even highlighted a bunch. Yeah, I highlighted a bunch of them. But don't let that dissuade you. This story really is beautiful and thought-provoking. I was a child when I was looking this up as well. But when you read this, you quickly become invested in the ordinary requirements of survival and the things that we are going to take for granted, like shelter and growing food and the like. Now, I've spoken before about The Martian. I have that one right here. The Martian by Andy Weir. This is essentially the sci-fi version of Robinson Crusoe. You can also see the influence in classics like Swiss Family Robinson and other ones as well, which is also a great adventure story. So if you like this one, if you like The Martian, and you want to try something a little more classic, you're willing to read a classic, genre-inspiring historic work of literature, I would recommend looking no further than Robinson Crusoe. I think one of the reasons this book continues to resonate, besides its place in history, is it does a really great job of reminding us how little we actually need to survive physically, which are, some of the things that we think are very much not essential. And yet there are other things like belonging in human relationships that we might think are not essential that we realize they really are. It also demonstrates the ingenious potential for human beings when we're forced to rely on ourselves, which from a self-reliance perspective, I really appreciate and find very empowering. So we both need people, but we also are very capable when we need to be. So both of those can exist. Anyways, if we're talking about influence and about adventure, I would be remiss not to give a nod to the Odyssey, particularly this week, as in theaters we have Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey just coming on. I haven't seen it yet. Sure, some of you guys have seen it. Be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. But this story follows the long and perilous journey of Odysseus as he struggles for 10 plus years to return home after the Trojan War, which is depicted in the Iliad. He faces monsters and gods and temptations of all sorts and his own internal struggles as well, which is really innovative and unique. The Greeks really were amazing, and this is really one of the great Greek classics. Definitely worth reading. Choosing a translation is not something I would get analysis paralysis over. There are a lot of considerations. There are a number of worthy translations, which some of which kind of prioritize more the readability and others more fidelity to the original. But maybe this would be a topic people will be interested in the future. I won't go deep in that today. Let me know in the comments. But in either case, you really can't talk adventure without mentioning the Odyssey. This is a really great adventure story. A lot of fun. Highly recommend it. Now, I mentioned Tarzan earlier, one of the greatest adventure classics. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend checking it out as well. But Burroughs wrote a lot of other great adventure literature. Tarzan, the John Carter series, and I want to talk about one of the other books, which is really one of 2 novels that I think really inspired Jurassic Park, which could also have a place on this list. So imagine for a moment, the world is a bunch of survivors of World War I. They commandeer a German U-boat and discover an isolated island away from the rest of the world, kind of like an isolated continent, really, where evolution took a very different course. And we travel each step deeper inland, and it feels like we're going millions of years backwards through time. Then we have dinosaurs, and we have other stories. Now, there are really two main stories with dinosaurs that influence Jurassic Park, but the other one is Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, which is amazing. And this one is The Land That Time Forgot. Just a great story. I think it's a better one if we want adventure. This is simply because it's more fast paced. It's more adventurous. It's kind of the criteria that we're looking for today, right? Most people know Burroughs because of Tarzan, which is also fast paced and adventurous. Like I said, it's really great. Or through the John Carter series, which is it also moves and it's good in terms of adventure. But really, Burroughs is one of the best when it comes to adventure in general. You could read anything that's written by him and I think enjoy it. Because his books capture something that modern fiction I think a lot of times forgets, which is that adventure is supposed to be, or at least it's allowed to be, just simple fun. As with all the books, it's imaginative and energetic, and it throws us into a fun and exciting world that we would normally not otherwise get to visit, which is why I love The Land That Time Forgot, and I highly recommend you check it out. Now, I know I mentioned this before, everyone talks about The Count of Monte Cristo, and it's a great adventure story, one of my personal favorites. I've talked about this before. It can have a place on this list, sure, but there's another novel by the same author that just might be an even better entry on this list as far as adventure stories go. Because if we're talking purely about adventure quality, I honestly think that The Three Musketeers is the better pick. In it, D'Artagnan, our protagonist, he essentially arrives in Paris with nothing, with a recommendation from his father to kind of show that his intention is to join the Royal Musketeers. So I guess that's one thing he arrives with. But immediately he's robbed. Then he challenges three people to duels, and then he gets caught up in conspiracies and in love triangles, and there's near-death experiences, and this is all only on his first day, right? So from there, the pacing does not slow down. It keeps going. I can just promise you that when you read this, you will be rewarded by sword fights and secret missions and political conspiracies between the king and the cardinal, and impossible escapes, and friendship, which is really one of the key moral cores. A wonderful, courageous, and deep story. Now, I finally read this for the first time earlier this year, and I couldn't believe how much I really enjoyed it and how much I wish I'd read it earlier. It feels very modern, actually, to read The Three Musketeers. It's funny, it's fast-paced, it's just a joy to read. Great companion to The Count of Monte Cristo. Wonderful read. I highly recommend it. Now, my final choice here. This is one of the first novels that I recommend when people ask me for an adventure classic. I love this book. King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. Really just a beautiful story. It begins with a cryptic invitation from a strange wealthy man to join an expedition to search for a kingdom that probably doesn't exist. Nobody's seen it, and it has a secret treasure hidden somewhere beyond the almost impassable mountain range in Africa. There's these untold riches, and all these people have heard of it. They think it's a myth. Some people believe it's real. There's a group that eventually sets out to find it, and it consists only, in classic style, of the eccentric and the truly desperate, and those who with really dubious and uncertain backgrounds. So it's exactly what you want for an opening to an adventure story. It's a great tale full of rich characters, fascinating settings. And that's a great fun aspect of this as well. I read this on a road trip earlier this year, and I think we must have listened to the book practically from beginning to end without interruption. It was just so entertaining. It's just so fun. The myth that we are working towards in this story, the myth we're trying to uncover, it's really amazingly unfurled. The characterizations are interesting. Sometimes they're stereotyped with the minor characters, which is par for the course for 1880s literature. But the main characters are really well written. I think it's worth reading. And there's something about adventure stories, right, that really brings together the most unlikely companions imaginable and slowly turns them into a kind of close-knit family of sorts. And when it's done well, like in this novel, like in King Solomon's Mines, you feel like you're joining the family as well. So King Solomon's Mine does adventure better than almost any novel I've read, and around it is everything I love about the genre. lost civilization, kind of impossible landscapes to traverse, dangerous expeditions, and ancient mysteries combined with humor and strange, unexpected turns and the constant chugging forward momentum. So when I finished it, I honestly thought that this is one I'm gonna have to talk about. It's might be one of the best adventure novels that I've ever read. And if I could convince more people to read just one adventure classic, I think I would start with this one. Um, it's not an unknown classic, but it probably receives less attention than it truly deserves. Now, the wonderful thing about adventure fiction is that the deeper you go, the more you discover. And this is the thing with any great work of literature, right? There are so many classics for myself waiting on the shelf. A few that come to mind: She by H. Rider Haggard. After reading King Solomon's Mine, I want to read everything Haggard wrote. I'm not sure if they're as good, but I'm just interested. Captain Blood is another one that has been high on my list for a long time. The Prisoner of Zenda is one I heard about more recently, but I also want to read. There are so many more journeys that are still waiting out there, and that's one of the reasons I love reading, because the list really never ends. It only grows at a faster rate than we're able to read it, so that might be a problem. But adventure stories remind us that the world is still larger than we can ever fully appreciate. And they make us want to go on an adventure, to leave home, to cross oceans and climb mountains, and believe that there are still places worth discovering. Sometimes this is physically, and sometimes this is just in our imaginations. But in either case, they compel us to grow, to move forward. So if you have another favorite adventure novel, let me know below. I always end up adding your recommendations to my own reading list, as I said, which is ever growing. If you're looking for more great books, I would love to have you subscribe. We've got a lot more adventures to come, and hopefully in the future, many more books to talk about. So happy reading, and if you're heading out on any adventures, Godspeed.